On October 4, 2023, Pope Francis released Laudate Deum, an apostolic exhortation focused on the climate crisis. In the weeks leading up to its release, it became known as Laudato Si 2.0. There are, of course, some similarities between the two documents. Laudato Si, which was released in 2015, was an encyclical, almost 40,000 words in length, which focused on the climate crisis and other issues and Pope Francis's suggested solutions to these issues. Laudate Deum, in contrast, is an exhortation. It's much shorter in length, only about 7,500 words. We're going to look briefly at several areas of this document that I believe are important for us to understand from a biblical and prophetic perspective. The first one is this. Pope Francis makes a very strong call for a global authority that has real power. In paragraph 35, he says, "When we talk about the possibility of some form of world authority regulated by law, we need not necessarily think of a personal authority. We are speaking above all of more effective world organizations equipped with the power to provide for the global common good." Popes for decades have been making similar pleas for a world authority that can handle many aspects of the world's laws and life. For example, Pope Paul VI wrote in 1967, "Who can fail to see the need and importance of thus gradually coming to the establishment of a world authority capable of taking effective action on the juridical and political planes?" In 2003, Pope John Paul II said essentially the same thing. He said, "Is this not the time for all to work together for a new constitutional organization of the human family, truly capable of ensuring peace and harmony between peoples, as well as their integral development?" And then Pope Benedict XVI wrote this, "There is a strongly felt need for a reform of the United Nations organization, and likewise of economic institutions and internal finance, so that the concept of the family of nations can acquire real teeth." Now that last phrase, of course, was interesting. What did Pope Benedict XVI mean by real teeth? It obviously means that this world authority has the power and the means of enforcing people or nations to follow the agenda that has been set forth. Another area of focus that was contained in Laudate Deum was found in paragraph 36, and that is that Pope Francis regrets that global crises are wasted for effecting change. He wrote, "It continues to be regrettable that global crises are being squandered when they could be the occasions to bring about beneficial changes." This is what happened in the 2000 to 2008 financial crisis and again in the COVID-19 crisis. For the actual strategies developed worldwide in the wake of those crises fostered greater individualism, less integration, and increased freedom for the truly powerful, who always find a way to escape unscathed. I found this very interesting because most people I know would say that through COVID-19 and after COVID-19, there was less individual freedom than we had before. But apparently it's not enough or sufficient in Pope Francis's view. Another area of focus was found in paragraph 70, and that is that he calls for a personal and cultural spiritual transformation. This was near the end of the document, and Pope Francis wrote this, "Yet what is most important is something less quantitative, the need to realize that there are no lasting changes without cultural changes, without a maturing of lifestyles and convictions within societies, and there are no cultural changes without personal changes." Now in this document, Pope Francis did not elaborate on what he believed those personal or cultural changes should be. However, he did in Laudato Si 1.0. In that document, he ended the document, the encyclical, by suggesting some very widespread changes that he would like to see take place both within families, within churches, and within society in general. And here's what he wrote. This was his solution to the climate problem. Paragraph 237 of Laudato Si. "Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, and with the world." So Pope Francis's suggested solution to the climate crisis, as well as many of the other issues that he mentioned in that first document on the climate crisis, is Sunday. Sunday needs to be a day of rest, and this will not only help people and families, but also, so he says, the environment. Now, in the years following the release of Laudato Si, there was an action plan that was developed and then put into place during COVID. The Vatican launches a 7-year Laudato Si action plan. The article stated, "We will launch the Laudato Si action plan, which are 7 Jubilee years of concrete action. The hope is that it will create a massive movement of families, parishes, schools, and universities, health centers and hospitals, business and governments." So the plan here is that there would be a worldwide movement that takes 7 years in order to put into place the suggested solutions contained in Laudato Si. And presumably that would also include the required Sunday rest, which is so important in Pope Francis's view to combating the climate crisis. The 7 years would end with a special year of Jubilee. The article goes on to state, "The reason for a 7-year plan is based on the biblical significance of the number 7. Year 1 will be dedicated to planning through community building, resource sharing, and drafting local action plans. The next 5 years will be dedicated to concrete action, while the last year will be a sabbatical year dedicated to praise and thanking God." So Laudate Deum, released in 2023, is part of the concrete action plans designed to put into effect the Laudato Si action plan, or the suggested solutions to the climate crisis contained in Laudato Si. There is a 7-year time frame which the Vatican envisions, with the last year, the 7th year, being a sabbatical year or a Sabbath year of rest. Now, why is this important? It's a 7-year plan ending in the year 2027. Pope Francis took office in the year 2013. So that would be 14 years after Pope Francis takes office that the Laudato Si agenda, including Sunday as a protected day of worship, is put into place. Now, what does this have to do with Bible prophecy? Again, we are looking at Laudate Deum, Laudato Si, and everything connected with this from a biblical prophetic perspective. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9, we read, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." So we're going to look at a Bible story that happened thousands of years ago that just may shed light on a 14-year time frame that we see taking place today. And that story is found in the book of Genesis with the story of Joseph and his time in Egypt. Reading from Genesis chapter 41 and beginning in verse 25, we read this. "And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine or cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored cows or kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous." As the story develops, Joseph's brothers, who had actually sold him into slavery, end up coming to Egypt when their food runs out in Canaan. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but he doesn't immediately reveal himself. Instead, he puts them through a series of tests to see if their character has changed. And finally, at the end of those series of tests, Joseph is satisfied that his brothers have had a change in heart. He reveals himself, and they find that they have found their lost brother, whom they had told their father Jacob for years had been killed by a vicious beast in the wilderness. Now here's where things get interesting. In a video several years ago, Pope Francis referred to this story about Joseph and his brothers in Egypt, and he called himself or referred to himself as the long-lost brother that his brothers needed to rediscover in a time of crisis. Here's the short video clip.
Io ho la nostalgia che questa separazione finisca e ci dia la comunione. Io ho nostalgia di quell'abbraccio di qua nel quale parla la Sacra Scrittura, quando i fratelli di Giuseppe, affamati, sono andati a Egitto per comprare, per poter mangiare. Ma andavano a comprare, avevano i soldi, ma non potevano mangiare i soldi. E lì hanno trovato qualcosa più del pasto, hanno trovato il fratello.
So just to make sure that we don't miss the point that Pope Francis is trying to make, the man who was filming this video, his name was Tony Palmer. He recorded another video where he explains exactly the message that Pope Francis is trying to give by calling himself the long-lost brother. Here's that video.
Pope Francis himself is the one who is asking us for full unity and full communion. What is striking is that he awakens us to the fact that the real communion is not the bread, but the brother. When he uses his story about the brothers of Joseph, because of their hunger, starvation in fact, they were then propelled to Egypt to go find bread to eat. But they found something more than bread. They found their brother. And this, Pope Francis is saying, this is what we find in the true communion. We find each other. We find our brotherhood. We find our brother and our sister that we thought we'd lost. When we look for bread, which we think we need, we are going to find our brother, which is what we really need. We need to find that we are brothers and sisters again.
So don't miss the message in these two videos. The message is that the true communion is not in the bread, but in the brother. And if we can come together and unite once again as Christians, or even as all faiths in this world, perhaps around some crisis, we will have the true communion and humanity can move forward. The message is that the bread does not matter at all. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does bread represent in the Bible? And there are some Bible verses that tell us exactly what bread represents. The first one is found here in John 6, verse 35. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. According to Jesus, He Himself is the bread of life. And then there is a second meaning for what bread represents in the Bible, and that's found in Matthew 4, verse 4. That verse says, But He answered and said, this is Jesus speaking, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So according to the Bible, bread represents Jesus Christ Himself, and it also represents the Bible, the Word of God. And these two meanings of bread are extremely important for us to recognize today and in terms of what we are studying here. Remember that Pope Francis said that the bread does not matter, what really matters is the brother. If we can unite together, that's where the true answer is found. The answer is not found in the bread. A Catholic website called CatholicAnswers.com had this very interesting definition of the word fundamentalism. The belief that is first and foremost the defining characteristic of fundamentalists is their reliance on the Bible to the complete exclusion of any authority exercised by the Church. The second is their insistence on a faith in Christ as one's personal Savior and Lord. And this was an official statement. You can see at the top of the screen that this statement and the website and the article all contained the imprimatur. This is the stamp of approval from the Bishop of San Diego. Now, Pope Francis gave a strong call to the United States Congress in 2015 when he spoke there, and he said, we must be especially attentive to every type of fundamentalism, whether religious or of any other kind. Another fascinating and interesting statement put forth by the Holy See is contained in this document. This is titled "The Church at the United Nations." And we read, "As a full member of the international community, the Holy See finds itself in a very peculiar situation because it is spiritual in nature. Its authority is religious and not political. The real and only realm of the Holy See is the realm of conscience." The founders of the United States of America also understood the danger that this religious and political system posed to the type of government that they were trying to set up. John Adams wrote in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, "I have long been decided in opinion that a free government and the Roman Catholic religion can never exist together in any nation or country. Liberty and popery cannot live together." Those were strong words from John Adams, but he was not alone in this opinion. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I do not pretend to be a prophet, but though not a prophet, I see a very dark cloud on our horizon. And that dark cloud is coming from Rome. It is filled with tears of blood. It will rise and increase till its flanks will be torn by a flash of lightning, followed by a fearful peal of thunder. Then a cyclone such as the world has never seen will pass over this country, spreading ruin and desolation from north to south. Neither I nor you, but our children will see those things." Another person active during the founding years of the United States was the French General Marquis de Lafayette. He wrote, "It is my opinion that if the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars in Europe." Now, as the papacy looked at the type of government that was being set up in the United States, they expressed their concern as well with the freedom of conscience and the separation of church and state that was being formed in the United States. In 1864, Pope Pius IX condemned that erroneous opinion, most fatal in its effects on the Catholic Church and the salvation of souls, that liberty of conscience and worship is each man's personal right, which ought to be legally proclaimed and asserted in every rightly constituted society, and that a right resides in the citizens to an absolute liberty, which should be restrained by no authority, whether ecclesiastical or civil, whereby they may be able openly and publicly to manifest and declare any of their ideas whatever, either by word of mouth, by the press, or in any other way. In other words, every freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment, in the Bill of Rights, Pope Pius IX did not agree with. He was very concerned that it would destroy the agenda and the power that the Catholic Church had exercised for over 1,000 years in Europe. What about the papacy today? Thomas Doyle is a Catholic priest, and he served for a number of years as a canon lawyer in the Vatican embassy in Washington, D.C. He said several years ago on an interview with NPR, "The Holy See is the last absolute monarchy in the world today. The Pope, when he is elected, is answerable to no human power. He has absolute authority over the entire Roman Catholic Church, direct authority that reaches down to individual members." And how close does that authority come? We already saw in a previous statement that the Vatican, the Holy See, the papacy, and the Pope claim to have direct authority all the way down to a person's conscience. Thomas Doyle goes on, "In the Roman Catholic Church, the office of Pope includes the three main offices of government. He is the supreme judge, the supreme legislator, and the supreme executive. So there's no separation of powers. There is no possibility of checks and balances." What we see in the form of government that defines the papacy is a union of church and state and a hierarchical form of government which goes all the way from the Pope down to individual members and includes his right to control, coerce, and compel the conscience. Now let's go back to Joseph's story in Genesis chapter 47. What happens at the end of this story? After the 14 years have passed, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, at the end of this 14 years, Pharaoh is now in control of everything in Egypt. So in the famine in Egypt, all of the money is eventually spent to buy food, and the people now have no more money. Pharaoh has all of the money to be found in the land of Egypt. What else happens? And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money fails. And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give for your cattle if money fail. So after Pharaoh took control of all of the money in Egypt, then the people sold him their cattle, and we would presume their other personal possessions. And so all of the private property now belongs to Pharaoh as well. What happened next? Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. So not only did Pharaoh end up owning all of the money in Egypt, but he owned all of the personal property, and now the people have sold their land and even themselves to Pharaoh. Pharaoh owns everything in the land of Egypt. We're reminded of a statement made not long ago by the WEF, the World Economic Forum, which projected that by the year 2030, nobody would own private property anymore. You would have no possessions of your own. Rather, you would rent everything, and in addition, they said you would be happy about it. It's interesting that the Egyptians, while they were certainly sorry to lose their possessions and their land, they were happy that they could at least survive. And so in some sense, they were glad to hand over everything that they owned to Pharaoh in exchange for life itself. Genesis 47 continues in verse 21. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. Are we seeing a push in our world today to bring everybody into cities, to bring people out of the country and to place them into cities? We are. And we have even seen talk about these 15-minute cities where you won't even have to own a vehicle. Everything will be within walking distance. You can walk and get everything you need within 15 minutes. Pharaoh will provide everything if you will give up your freedoms and move to the small or the large city. So what Egypt ended up with at the end of the 14 years was really a serfdom, which was the same structure, societal structure that existed in the Middle Ages when the papacy was in power in Europe. The crown owned everything, or the church owned everything, and by extension the crown then owned everything by permission of the church. Next in line were the wealthy landlords and the aristocracy. And finally you had the people and the peasants which worked the land. They owned nothing, but they were given what they needed to simply survive in return for the protection and the giving of food and so forth by the king. Where does this bring us now? What about the Laudato Si sabbatical year in 2027? We have seen a similarity between the 14 years in Joseph's time, which brought Egypt through 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine, and ended at the end of that 14-year time period with Pharaoh owning absolutely everything in the land of Egypt. Could there be a parallel with what is happening right now? Again, there is a 14-year time span between 2013, when Pope Francis took office, and the year 2027, when he hopes that the Laudato Si action platform will have been put fully into effect. We've already seen that the year 2027 is projected to be the sabbatical year of Jubilee, when the work is finished. The Laudato Si action platform projects an entire year in 2027 of Sabbath rest and celebration, because a work of recreating, or maybe we could say resetting the world, has been completed.